This is the 6th part of this manhwa. If you haven't watched the previous chapters, I recommend that you do so. The protagonist arrives at the forest, fleeing with Shelly, when suddenly dark energy rays appear beneath Tenidos. They emerge from the ground, piercing through the undead horse and causing everyone to fall. The protagonist manages to turn around and land safely with the girl, but he's so weak that the movement injures her, and she coughs blood. The protagonist realizes that her wound is getting worse, so he knows he has to find a safe place to heal her. He turns and asks his horse if it's okay, but despite having several broken bones, the horse says angrily that it can still run. At that moment, Andrew appears and tells the protagonist not to hurry, as the cardinals are eager to meet him. The protagonist looks at him with a terrifying gaze, as Andrew remarks, while sending his shadow to attack again. Andrew asks the protagonist if he wants to fight him since his face still hurts from the blow. The dark energy hits the protagonist directly, and he recognizes it as shadow magic. Andrew takes Shelly and says he will torture him before taking him to the cardinal once he loses his resistance. This infuriates the protagonist, who lunges again to strike the elf. Andrew easily blocks him and asks if he's really a mage, as all he seems to know is how to throw punches. A bony hand appears in front of him, and the protagonist has just summoned a horde of skeletons. This angers the elf, who claims that all the protagonist's knights must be undead summoned by him. He uses his magic to eliminate them and tells the protagonist that if he distributes his magical power among the undead he summons, he won't have much magic left to keep fighting. Suddenly, he notices huge circles of celestial magic behind him. The protagonist uses the spell Sword of Illumination, which unleashes a ray of light that strikes down the dark elf. As Andrew falls, he says that the protagonist can use divine magic without the help of angels. This shouldn't be possible since he possesses both magical attributes of divinity and necromancy. But then we see that the protagonist is not done yet, and magical electric spheres appear in the sky to strike the elf with their lightning, causing him to scream in pain and fall to the ground. Vivien, who is watching the confrontation with the cat, comments that it's not bad. She explains to the little one that liches are experts in magic, so Andrew was dreaming if he thought he could defeat one in that field. The cat asks if that means the protagonist can win, but instead of saying yes, the demon only replies that she doesn't know. Andrew lies wounded and exhausted on the ground but clenches his fist tightly. With difficulty, he manages to kneel, asking the protagonist hatefully how he dares to provoke him over and over again. Then we see a strange pendant with runes inscribed on it that begins to glow, and the elf says that now it's certain he must kill him, and he will do it. The elf's energy becomes so intense that it alone is enough to make the birds fly away from the impact. The protagonist also feels it and realizes that his opponent suddenly has more magical power, a magic that feels strange and oppressive for some reason. We see Andrew getting up completely renewed, saying he must kill him, with a huge magic circle behind him. The cat asks what's happening because suddenly the elf's energy is so disgusting. Vivien says it could be Kramartha, which confuses the cat, asking what that is. The demon explains that it was a time erased from human history, a cursed era for both gods and demons, the first and last sin of humanity. The girl's aura turns gloomy, and Vivien asks how the elf dares to flaunt Kramartha's legacy. This terrifies the cat, leaving him speechless, and he thinks it's the first time he sees such a face on a demon as cheerful as her. He wonders what humans did during the Kramartha era. The protagonist realizes he's running out of magic and can't stay still because he still needs to heal Shelly. So he uses a fire spell on the dark elf to buy some time. But the elf just laughs, dispelling the flames effortlessly with his own magic, and asks the protagonist if that's all he can do. Then he uses the artifact to penetrate the protagonist's armor with his magic, making him realize that it's bad. With one last attack, the elf unleashes another barrage of shadows, finally breaking the protagonist's armor and revealing his true form. The protagonist is thankful that the sacred fabric Catherine gave him partially protected him against the magic, so his bones didn't suffer too much damage. He uses wind magic to attack Andrew, determined to find a way to remove his magical object. However, with just his leg, the elf is able to stop him and pin him to the ground, asking again if that's all he's capable of and warning him not to touch him again. Then he explains that Kramartha's legacy can instantly triple his magical power, so there's no way a Lich like him can defeat him. The protagonist realizes he's suppressed by the magic and can't move. The elf draws his sword and tells him that, as a Lich, all he has to do to kill him is to pierce through the fire of his soul. He plans to dismember his skeleton slowly, and it might hurt a little. As the sword falls, time freezes, and the protagonist knows he must calm down and think fast because he can't fall yet. Shelly is still waiting for him to heal her, but he can't think of anything. Then Vivien lifts her head and tells him that she knows how difficult it is, how the world works like that, where the strong can trample on the weak, and the weak don't even have the right to ask for mercy. She asks if he wants the power to save Shelley, and to obtain it, all he has to do is invoke her name. She will give him the power he needs to change everything that's happening at that moment. It's said that angels are never there when you need them the most, but demons are, as long as you're willing to pay a price. But then we see that Andrew is perplexed because he was able to see Vivien. He wonders what's happening since Vivien's presence is overwhelming, and he didn't even notice when she arrived. The girl thinks it's bad because by increasing her power, the elf could discover her concealment. Andrew tries to escape, saying that demons don't answer to anyone, and she seems to be thousands of years old. Suddenly, Tenidos knocks him down, interrupting his escape, and tells the protagonist that it's his chance. So the protagonist gets up injured and manages to steal Andrew's medallion with a jump. Defeated, Andrew ends up tied and calls the protagonist a bastard for being a paladin who allied with a demon. He says it doesn't matter because elves also have a truce with them, so they can't kill him. But the protagonist can't help wondering how long the elf has been rambling on. Meanwhile, Vivien looks dark as she thinks Andrew is useless for not enduring a little longer, as he might have eventually yielded to her. This thought makes her use the cat as a stress toy, and he pleads with her not to intimidate him due to her frustration. Finally, the protagonist lets out a relieved sigh and says he must now treat Shelley and fix Tenidos. But then his eyes begin to close, catching everyone's attention, especially the cat, who approaches the protagonist in concern. But the protagonist can't hear what the cat is saying. He eventually faints. We see his soul's fire reignite and shine in his eyes. The protagonist wakes up startled and aware that he fainted. He starts asking desperately about the time, Shelley's whereabouts, and if he used too much magic. Someone reassures him that Shelley is fine, and the voice sounds familiar, prompting the protagonist to recognize Irene. He panics when he sees her, trying to quickly explain everything, but she stops him and asks him to put on his armor first. Abby Roberts is holding the armor, terrified to see the protagonist's skeleton dancing. Irene informs the protagonist that someone is waiting for him. He puts on his armor and follows Irene, wondering why she isn't asking anything despite seeing his true form. He wonders what happened to Shelley, the cat, and Tenidos. Suddenly, a voice tells him that everyone is okay. Shelley's transformation magic and injuries have been healed. She only needs a good night's sleep to fully recover. Everyone else is at the camp, so the protagonist should follow Irene to find them. The voice belongs to Catherine, and the protagonist is relieved that she's okay. Vivien comments that not only is she fine, but her scent has become even more annoying. Catherine has hung her on her sword with a sign that reads "Bad Demon Taking Advantage of Others." Vivien asks Catherine to let her go, arguing that there's nothing wrong with demons doing bad things. Catherine explains to the protagonist that the Holy Spirit lifted some restrictions and granted her more autonomy, so now she can decide whether to help him or not without his consent. This touches the protagonist, but Catherine thinks it means she no longer has the protection of the truce between deities, though she won't tell the Lich. The protagonist thinks that now he can finally breathe and focus on the problem in the capital. When they finally reach their destination, it turns out to be a huge camp with all the people who decided to evacuate the capital with him. Overwhelmed, the protagonist bursts into tears, and Irene tells him that everyone is grateful to him for helping them. Irene tells the protagonist that 2,300 people escaped, and from that day on, they are his people. The protagonist blushes at the thought of so many, but Irene is surprised that he's happy because only 2,000 out of the city's 100,000 inhabitants chose to follow him, though she says it should be enough for now. The noblewoman tells him they will return to the White City and asks the protagonist what he plans to do with the people. As he is about to respond, he falls silent and asks Irene how she would handle the situation. She is surprised that he seeks her opinion, so she asks to hear his thoughts first. The protagonist admits he planned to house them in Salmon Port but didn't think much beyond that. Irene reminds him that he needs to think about their accommodation, how they will live, and how they will get food because 2,000 people is not a small number. The protagonist thinks they could start farming, and Irene agrees it's a good idea, but the area around the port is saline, making it unsuitable for agriculture, and the economy relies on trade. However, high taxes have made the people poor and weak, so they might not accept 2,000 newcomers with a ruler they've never seen before. The protagonist admits he has no idea how to solve this problem since he only met the inhabitants a few days ago when he arrived in the human world. He asks Irene if she knows how to locate these people and wonders if she could show him how. This makes Iron realize that he no longer settles for being a heroic knight but is determined to learn to be a good leader. She mentions the riverbank, located half a day to the northwest of the port, where there is a stretch of beach. It has always been uninhabited due to river flooding, but if they build a hydroelectric plant upstream, the valley could become fertile. The protagonist realizes that Iron already had those areas marked on her map. Proudly, she explains that she left Horus in charge of the dam before they set off for the capital, surprising and amazing the protagonist. Iron then advises him to provide them with food, clothing, and shelter for the first 6 months. For the first 5 years, he shouldn't impose taxes and let them keep the food they grow until agriculture stabilizes. She suggests building temporary huts for shelter at first and later hiring artisans from the port to construct better houses. Excited, the protagonist shares this plan with the people, who are fascinated by what awaits them. Finally, he understands what Iron meant when she said he was ignoring what the people needed. Then we see Benedict assuming power again in the kingdom, appointing rogues and criminals as his new ministers. He allows the people to loot the kingdom as they please and then crowns himself amid the cheers of the crowd. This displeases Archbishop Dean, and he turns away, disgusted. We are told that the protagonist evacuated the capital with Iron, and upon their return, the caravan had grown by thousands. In the caravan, they see the girl who was mistreated by her father, and Bob calls her and tells her to get on the carriage as it's a long journey to the White City, and that carriage is for the injured. So she gets on and asks if a prince is driving for them. He says more or less and explains he spent some time raising horses, so he knows them well and can do it. She asks if a prince also left the royal capital, and he says that there is no place for him in that city anymore. He requests her to call him by his name as he is no longer a prince. The girl wonders if he wouldn't like to be king, as the paladin could help him ascend to the throne. But he explains that being a king means being responsible for the entire nation, and if a child like him can't even handle driving a carriage full of people, then he can't imagine being the king of a country. So, in reality, he feels relieved. Bob shares his plan to be under the protagonist's tutelage for a while, starting as a low-level squire, and eventually finding his own path. The girl says that Bob is just like them, as it took them a long time to let go of their past and find a way to move forward, so they don't know what the future holds. While recalling her violent father, she says that if she tries, she is sure it won't be worse than her past, and both of them agree to face it together. Meanwhile, Shelley makes a disgusted face due to the brew she must drink to recover. She asks how many more times she has to drink it, and the protagonist responds that Catherine said she must continue taking it for 3 more days. Shelley jokingly says that being a demon doesn't sound so bad, implying she could stop drinking it. But the protagonist tells her not to be capricious and drink it. She retorts that he's the only one who can't call her that, and they start arguing. Suddenly, Gregory appears and separates them, telling them to stop flirting. He asks them about this marriage commitment they supposedly have, but they plead with him to let them explain. He refuses to listen and says he will never accept it. In a scene change, we see Turtle stretching as he finally finished reading the novel. He decides it's time to go to the protagonist and collect his payment for the work. However, he is interrupted by a scream. A man is throwing fruit and vegetable baskets and scolding someone to be quiet because they are shouting. He asks an elderly woman who gave her permission to do business there and if she paid the protection fee, as they are the king's personal guard and can't be disrespected. The woman cries, saying she has no money, but the man accuses her of pretending, claiming that the paladin gave money from the treasury to all citizens. Therefore, they are there to collect the king's debt, and she must hand over the money if she doesn't want to die. The man starts mercilessly beating her while laughing manically. Turtle is shocked that such a situation is happening in broad daylight on the street, and he wonders if he should report it to the protagonist's order of knights. He sees that barbarity and crime are happening everywhere and wonders what happened during the half-month he was away. He pleads for the protagonist to come back, as if this continues, people will die. We move to the abyss, to the lair of demons, where the pair of demons and Vivien are visiting. Vivien thinks that no matter how many times she goes there, she can't get used to the place. The door to a place called the Temple of 1,000 Demons opens, and the names of the 3 visitors are announced along with the purpose of their visit. Inside, they are received by a multitude of different demons, and Vivien introduces each of the 3, saying they have come to visit the Demon King. They see the Demon King sitting imposingly on his throne. He understands that they encountered difficulties in their mission to bring down the protagonist. Zelda confirms this, explaining that as the executor of the mission, she tried to use divine authority and royal power against the protagonist's beliefs, leading them towards disaster and his downfall. However, instead of being destroyed, the protagonist managed to become a saint. After the incident, things spiraled out of control, and they didn't know what to do anymore, so they can only apologize to him for their incompetence. The Demon King then asks if that's all they wanted to say, and one of the demons defends Zelda, saying he doesn't need to apologize for what happened, as no one knew the protagonist could become a saint. He was the first, or perhaps the last in history to achieve it, so they should take it as a kind of warning. Another demon appears, petting Vivien, while saying that the original mission doesn't matter anymore, and she is curious about the difference between the protagonist and a normal saint, as he could become the first fallen saint in history. Vivien remarks that if they only want to see him fall, then there is no solution. Tarvius scolds her and reminds her to be careful with her words when in front of the Demon King. However, the Demon King finds it interesting and intrigued. He decides to open his eyes, forcing Vivien to kneel. He asks if her name is Vivien, and she confirms it, while thinking that she understands why he is the Demon King, as his presence is terrifying. The Demon King asks her to explain her proposal in detail. Vivien explains that the protagonist's beliefs differ from those of the Holy Spirit, and there are humans like him who, instead of preaching the beliefs of the Spirit, adhere more to the code of chivalry. So, if they grant the protagonist freedom, he will continue to grow, and eventually, he will destroy the belief system that the Spirit took thousands of years to build. The old ones of heaven won't allow this to happen, and the protagonist will create a conflict against the celestial world. At that moment, the demons will invade the hearts of humans. The Demon King bursts into malevolent laughter, telling her that she is right. He marks her with his symbol, telling her that from now on, she is his servant. He says that beliefs will be divided, the power of God will deteriorate, and it will be at that moment that the world will be reborn. He orders Vivien to protect the protagonist's identity even if it costs her life. Even if they have to break the pact they have with the gods. He assures her not to worry, as if he breaks it, he will use his status to invoke special clauses and protect her. But Vivien knows that the condition to use those clauses is that she has to come out alive and return to the abyss. Basically, he is leaving her to fend for herself. It is told that when the protagonist returned to the White City, the people resettled and began living their lives normally. However, something happened before they could address the problem in the capital. One of Iron's soldiers informs them that they spotted 80,000 troops from the Kingdom of Alan on the border, and they sent their Iron Cross troops, their elite forces. Seth, the Lord of the Border, urgently requests help. Iron wonders if King Barnet didn't learn his lesson about not attacking Isaac while it's dealing with civil unrest. But the scout tells her that the army had no intentions of invading. They were just grazing on the border, so she wonders if Barnet is testing their limits, as administrative functions in the capital are paralyzed. The royal family is dead, and the state of the kingdom is one where lords are working separately. She is unsure of what to do. Then, the protagonist steps forward and tells her not to worry, as he will fight against them. However, she explains that it's not possible, as the troops haven't invaded the kingdom yet, and since he and his order are their introduction, his presence on the border would show other countries the opportunity to take advantage. She thinks that the story of the battle in the capital must have spread, and no one will want to face him. So, as long as he is not on the front lines, his mere existence is a persuasive element. She tells him that she will handle the Kingdom of Alan, while his task is to quell the chaos in the capital as soon as possible. As if he achieves it, no country will dare to be so provocative. The protagonist asks if she will go to the front again, and she confirms it. During her time in the capital, Horace trained a new group of soldiers, whom she will take with her to the border. The protagonist tries to protest again, and Iron understands that it's because of his oath, which prevents him from letting her go to the battlefield alone. So she tells him to hit her in the face, and if he succeeds, she will take him with her. The protagonist prepares himself and thinks he should measure the punch, but when he strikes, she suddenly knocks him down and renders him completely immobilized. She says it's just a normal combat technique and knows that in his opinion, he considers her weak, as if he lifts a finger, she will be reduced to ashes. But she points out that those she faces don't know how to use magic and are flesh and blood like her. The protagonist is completely immobilized, and she tells him that for a human, that position would be lethal. Iron clarifies that she's not a princess in need of his protection but the supreme ruler of the Becher Duchy. She explains that the country is like a sophisticated magical formation that can only function properly if everyone does their job. Her duty as a duchess is to help the crown protect the country, while his duty as a paladin is to calm the disturbances that arose in the capital. Then the protagonist asks if she's not going to ask him anything, referring to his identity. She only responds that she knows he will confess his secrets in due time. Touched, the protagonist promises to tell her the whole truth in time, and they wish each other luck. We move 1 month later to a commercial route in the mountains between the kingdoms of Isaac and Fides. The protagonist assigned a research mission to the children of his order named Air and Nanya. They joined Horus training during the protagonist's journey, earning them the opportunity to join the expedition. Dora and Bob, the newcomers, are told by Air and Nanya that they must do well. Bob addresses them as knights, despite being asked to call them by their names. Their mission is to find a group of thieves who have been raiding the road for 10 years. Clearing the route will allow food to be transported safely. Air reminds them that they are just an investigative group and must avoid conflict. Suddenly, Air collides with what seems to be a huge bush. To their surprise, it turns out to be a man who tries to attack Air. Bob intervenes and manages to block the blow, thanks to the sacred mark that the angels engraved on them, increasing their power and enabling them to face adult knights. However, the man's strength is still greater than theirs. Nanya jumps in to help her companions and knocks the man down, using the back of her sword to avoid hurting him. Enraged, the man starts shouting in an unknown language that the kids don't understand. More men emerge from the bushes surrounding the group. Air asks what these creatures are, and Dora tells them they are dwarves, which is uncommon to find in a group within human territory. Nanya wonders what they are up to, but Dora admits she doesn't know their language. Then, the apparent leader asks one of his men to come forward and delivers a message that the other seems to understand. He then starts telling the kids to listen carefully. The message is that the chief opened the mountain and planted the trees, so if they want to pass through, they must leave a tribute. Otherwise, they won't hesitate to kill or bury them, leaving the kids stunned and confused. Air realizes that the dwarves must be the thieves they were looking for. Nanya asks what they should do, as they have too many people to try to defeat them. Bob asks Dora if she could help them create an escape route. She agrees and immediately throws her spear into the air. It is revealed that Dora has a vow with the protagonist that prevents her from taking the initiative to harm humans. However, as her weapon whistles through the air, injuring the dwarves, it is revealed that this vow only applies to humans. The vampire's attacks cut through and repel the dwarves as she advances, forcing them to step back and clear a path. Bob tells them they must retreat quickly and inform the protagonist as soon as possible about the dwarf thieves. The two knights follow him as they run and tell him there's no need to inform them because they already know. The chief realizes this and tells them to stop, but as they don't listen, he orders his men not to let the humans escape and to bring something they have with them. The chief asks them how dare they hurt their brothers and threatens to make them pay for it. It is revealed that the dwarves are carrying a huge cannon. The chief orders them to fire, and the cannon explodes, releasing a large fireball that travels the ground and reaches the kids in seconds. Dora stays behind to stop it. She believes that without enchantments, they should be able to withstand the dwarves' firearms. Dora takes a direct shot with her lance, causing the fire to split in half and breaking the projectile in two. The impact destroys half of her helmet. She comments that, as expected, thanks to the protection of the sacred mark, they suffered no damage. And she still hates sunlight. Suddenly, she opens her eye and casts a spell on the dwarves, blinding them for a moment, and then causing them to fall unconscious. As they retreat, the kids praise Dora and ask when she joined the knights. They mention that she is the adopted daughter of the protagonist, which explains her power. In a different scene, we see the protagonist's camp where Andrew looks uncomfortable with Shelley in front of him. Shelley asks if he needs something from him, and she wants to ask for advice. She tells him that the protagonist gave her a pendant, an ancient relic that can enhance magic. Andrew clarifies that it's an item that can store magic during daily life, and then be used in critical moments. He thinks it's a waste that the protagonist gave it to her since she's human and can't use magic at all. Jones, resting nearby, communicates telepathically that he should be grateful she's there, otherwise, Andrew would slow them down. Andrew admits he didn't want to be in this situation, and it's the protagonist's fault that he now has a soul seal. Jones reminds him that they all suffered that fate. Shelley interrupts them, saying that they seem to get along well and asks if she can join the conversation. They are surprised since they were talking telepathically and didn't say anything out loud. Shelley reveals that the protagonist imbued the pendant with magic, allowing her to hear their thoughts while wearing it. Both feel spied on, but she explains it's not her intention, she just wants to ask some questions. Like what exactly Kramartha is, what happened during that era, and why the name isn't recorded in the history of any human kingdom. Meanwhile, Vivien scolds the protagonist for reading and proposes going out to do good deeds and preach the sacred doctrine. He tells her that Irene and Catherine recommended those books. Vivien says he's not a paladin if he stays in the tent reading all day, and that if he reads, it should be the Bible. She also mentions he's stopped attending mass. The protagonist agrees, but the cat comments that she seems to be particularly active lately, to which the protagonist suggests it could be due to heartbreak, based on what he has read. Let's go back half a month to when the protagonist left the White City. Irene filled his luggage with all the books he needed to read, much to Tenito's suffering, who complains about the weight of knowledge. Irene reassures him that he has plenty of time to read them, and they will help him understand the world of humans. She reminds him that he has a teacher he can turn to at any time, referring to Shelley. Shelley advises the protagonist to talk to those around him if he feels confused. Irene asks him not to disappoint them as it is his first time going to a foreign country. In another scene, the protagonist is reading the books when Vivien snatches them away and urges him to wake up. She scolds him for reading useless books and says they won't be able to investigate the Bible properly. The protagonist mentions that Catherine is also reading, so Vivien angrily grabs the book from Catherine too. Vivien expresses her concern that the protagonist, as a paladin, should be spreading the sacred faith instead of reading human books. She asks if he has become a fallen angel. The protagonist admits that Vivien has a point and questions if it is appropriate for him as a paladin not to spread the sacred faith. Catherine then asks him about his beliefs. The protagonist initially says he believes in the Holy Spirit, but Catherine refutes this, saying he would have obeyed and sacrificed Bob in the capital if he truly believed in that. She asks him about his purest thought when he became a saint. The protagonist responds that it was to protect Bob and restore justice. Catherine agrees that his sense of justice is his belief in divine belonging. Catherine clarifies that she believes in sacrificing individual interests for the happiness of the majority. That is her divine belonging, and she still thinks it was the right choice. She explains that angels see justice as a pursuit of the divine, and each person has their own version of justice. In heaven, there are a total of 19 spirits, each with its definition of the divine and justice. The Bible is the result of their collective deliberation and serves as a teaching for enlightenment, not an immutable or eternal rule. Therefore, the protagonist is free to explore the sacred path that belongs only to him. Back to the present, Vivien feels that things aren't going well, but her mission is only to keep the protagonist's identity hidden. She wonders what happened to Catherine in heaven as she returned changed. Then they inform the protagonist that the research group has returned, and the knights say they have an important discovery. The protagonist orders Air to report their discoveries, and he tells them that they have uncovered the true identity of the bandits lurking in the Southwest Territory. It is a group of dwarves, estimated to be around 40 people, but the protagonist had no knowledge of their existence. Dora explains that she temporarily hypnotized them, so they will probably wake up soon. She warns that they carry large firearms, so powerful that she can only block 2 or 3 shots at most. If an ordinary Silver Moon Knight were to encounter them, they would turn into ashes instantly. The protagonist is frightened by their power, and Shelley explains that the firearms are special tube-shaped weapons that only goblins and dwarves know how to manufacture. She suggests that the dwarf bandits may not have a place to belong, so the protagonist should consider recruiting them to join the Silver Moon Knights. However, since the protagonist has never seen them before, he asks what dwarves are and whether they are a branch of the human species, as he comes from a place isolated from information. Shelley tells him that, according to legend, dwarves were created by the gods from the bodies of giants, but they turned out to be a failed product. Their bodies are small, but their physical strength is strong, making them excellent blacksmiths. According to records, weapons forged by dwarves are capable of killing enormous dragons. The protagonist reflects on the idea of them being a failed product of the gods when Catherine appears and says they have nothing to do with that. Like rural demons, dwarves are creatures native to that great land. Among angels, dwarves have another name, the blessed race of the earth or children of the earth. Meanwhile, the group of dwarves discusses their plans. One of them informs the chief that they have found the camp as expected. The chief mocks the humans, knowing that they would report their presence, which is why they have a larger group. He mentions that Dora probably thinks they were hypnotized when, in reality, they were following them. The dwarves do not possess magical abilities, but they are born with a high resistance to magic. The chief plans to attack and steal everything from the humans while they are asleep that night. However, Vivien overhears their plans and alerts everyone on the hill about the dwarves' intentions to rob them. She asks the protagonist if he wants her to subdue them, but he advises against it. If they want to have a chance to recruit them, they must first show them friendship. This angers Andrew, and Jones asks the elf what is wrong with recruiting dwarves. Andrew explains that dwarves are their ancestral enemies, and they cannot coexist peacefully. He compares it to the idea of vampires living and eating with werewolves, who are their ancestral enemies, and Jones agrees that it would be impossible. They both protest against the alliance. As night falls, the camp goes dark, and the dwarves roll down the cliff like balls, ready to start their attack and reach the first tent. The dwarves begin to search the camp with the intention of stealing everything. But every tent they open is empty. This surprises them, as they saw many humans during the day, and they wonder if everyone escaped. However, their leader tells them not to be alarmed and points to the main tent where there is still light. They are amazed by its size and deduce it to be the most luxurious tent, assuming that all the good things must be inside. They prepare to raid it, entering with shouts, demanding everyone to stay still as it is a robbery. Suddenly, a shower of confetti welcomes them along with a surprised shout. The entire protagonist's order is present, welcoming them to the party organized by the Silver Moon Knights. The protagonist approaches the leader and informs him that everything has been prepared especially for them, and that they will love being part of this warm, big family. Annoyed, the dwarf leader insists they are there to rob, but the protagonist stuffs a piece of meat in his mouth, telling him to shut up and eat. The dwarf devours the meat but reiterates that their purpose is not the party but the robbery, emphasizing their professionalism and expertise. The protagonist appreciates their professionalism and asks if he could interview them about their plans and future expectations. This convinces the dwarf leader, who sits down and acknowledges the protagonist's astuteness. He explains that robbery is not just about stealing, as no thief gang can become big and strong just by robbing. The reason people choose their gang over others is because they offer a service that no other thief gang has, and it enhances the customer's experience. The dwarf leader pulls out the holy book, claiming it says that the rich should share with the poor. Since they are poor, the rich should share their wealth with them, as they are honest people who work hard every day but remain poor due to the rich hoarding most of the resources. The protagonist strikes him, correcting that the Holy Spirit never said those words. Instead, it advocates treating others as one would like to be treated. He asks if the dwarf leader really read the Bible. The dwarf admits he only read 3 pages, and they had many words he didn't understand. The protagonist strikes him again, telling him not to use the Holy Spirit to deceive people. The dwarf argues that he just wants to improve the customer experience. The protagonist emphasizes that it matters because he is a paladin and is in contact with the Holy Spirit. The dwarf turns to his men for support, but he sees them all tied up, revealing that the Silver Moon Knights had captured them while they were eating. The protagonist tells the dwarf leader that his professional plan has flaws but promises to help them find new targets because he is a kind-hearted paladin. The dwarf leader apologizes. Vivien asks Catherine if it is okay to continue like this, as it seems the protagonist has strayed from the path. She suggests they should use love to convince the dwarves instead of using force. Catherine responds that with enough strength, love doesn't matter, and asks if Vivien is unaware that the influence of angels is not solely based on love. Vivien, irritated, admits she knows but thinks that angels are the ones hiding things, leading her to have existential questions. It is mentioned that on that day, Vivien experienced the difficulties of common sense. Then we see the protagonist's order, happily celebrating that they can finally leave the mountains where they were lost for half a month, thanks to the help of the dwarves. They spot a village ahead, so they send scouts to explore. One of the villagers informs them that it is the border between the Kingdom of Fides and the Principality of Bert, 2 countries at war. The village has been raided by both sides in the past 2 months, and they expect it to continue next month. They advise Air to leave. Air mentions that, according to his information, both countries have been friends for generations, so they wonder why suddenly there's a war. Bob suggests it could be because the church weakened. Nanya asks how that is relevant, and Bob explains that on the continent, divine power is above royal power. All kings need the papacy's permission for their coronation and to start a war, just like what happened during the Battle of the White City. Bob adds that the protagonists suppressed the church in the capital of the kingdom, causing its influence to decline significantly. Now, the church has no time to deal with the problem between the 2 countries, so they wage war with impunity. The group understands that the war started because of the protagonist, who accepts it as true. Shelley tells him that even without him, it was inevitable for the 2 countries to clash. The Aloy Peninsula is isolated, and the population keeps growing. To feed their families, the countries would fight regardless of anything else. The protagonist insists that it is his fault, but Shelley says it isn't, and he's still naive despite everything that happened. The protagonist defends his innocence, claiming he's just a child, and it's okay to be childish. He orders his army to station near the village and fortify, as he is determined to stop the war in exchange for borrowing food to save the people in the capital. The protagonist's soldiers start settling in the village, and the villagers wonder where they come from. An old man says they are paladins who claim to be there to protect the village. Though they are few, at least they have good intentions, so the villagers start digging more shelters to hide. Meanwhile, the dwarves are discussing their escape plan when a dwarf yells excitedly about their intelligent leader. The leader reprimands the dwarf for yelling too loudly when someone might hear them. Suddenly, Shelly appears and greets them, startling the dwarves. The leader tries to explain, but Shelly reassures them, saying she admires the dwarves and won't expose them. She believes it's best if everyone stays on good terms. Then, she mentions reading in a book once about dwarves being able to create a firearm called a pistol. Half a month later, we see both armies arriving again near the village, led by their respective leaders, King Lucenvi of the Golden Serpent Dynasty, representing Fides, and Grand Duke Jean II of the White Fox Duchy, representing Bert. The villagers are surprised that they actually came and comment on never having seen so many people gathered before. The dwarves' leader reminds them to find the right moment to escape when the battle begins. Suddenly, a couple of the protagonist's knights appear on the battlefield. Lucen notices the moon emblem and wonders if there is any family in the peninsula with such an emblem. Jean wonders if they are reinforcements for his opponent. The knights announce that they are messengers of the protagonist, who requests a pre-battle conversation with both rulers. Fide's soldiers mention that the protagonist caused a disaster in Isaac, but they must be cautious as he may be a fool but is strong. Bert's soldiers wonder how he came to the peninsula and if he wasn't brought there by their enemies. They also note that he seems to have become corrupted, but the church has not declared him a heretic. Both rulers silence their men and ask the knights how they can prove they are messengers of the protagonist and not enemies' spies. The protagonist realizes they are questioning his identity, and Shelley suggests using the Paladin seal given by the Pope. However, he believes it's unnecessary as people prefer to believe what they see with their own eyes. So, he mounts Tenidos, accompanied by the cat, and presents himself before the kings, accompanied by Catherine, requesting a pre-battle conversation. The presence of the angel intimidates the soldiers and proves to Jean that the protagonist is authentic, so he regains his composure and asks what he wants to discuss. The protagonist responds that it's about the war, which angers Lucen. He accuses the protagonist of openly meddling in the war between two countries, as the hounds of the Holy Spirit never want to miss an opportunity to control others. He rides towards the protagonist to talk. The three characters gather at the center of the field, and the protagonist asks if they obtained the Pope's permission to wage that war. This confuses them, and Lucen laughs, quickly apologizing for being surprised that a paladin came from so far to ask such a question. Jean then asks if he obtained the Pope's permission when he declared war on the kingdom of Isaac, to which the protagonist answers no, but he got the permission of the Holy Spirit. Jean retorts that if he didn't get it, then he has no reason to ask for theirs either. Lucen says he prayed to the Holy Spirit before the war, but it doesn't bother with mere mortals like him. The protagonist realizes they are provoking him, and the cat teases him for not having wasted time reading so many books. Catherine tells him it's normal, as the moment he wielded his sword against Benedict, it was destined to happen. Since he overthrew a king, he could do the same with them, so all the rulers except Iron must harbor resentment against him. Additionally, no king of a country would like the Holy Spirit, as divine power has dominated over royal power for too long. No one likes someone being above them, even if it's a god. She asks the protagonist how he plans to handle this situation. He then tells them that both of them are right, as it has nothing to do with the Pope or the Holy Spirit. It's about his own desire to prevent that war from happening. He doesn't want to interfere in the war, but he wishes it not to take place, as it's already causing problems for many people, and if it continues, there will be more deaths and injuries. Therefore, if there's any conflict between them, he hopes to assume the role of an arbitrator to help them resolve it peacefully. However, both rulers say that they don't have any conflict between each other. The protagonist then asks why they are waging the war, and they say it's because the peninsula is vast. Lucen explains that he cannot afford to send his army to fight for other lands, and the Duchy of Bert separated from the Kingdom of Fides 100 years ago. The protagonist recalls Shelley's words where she also mentioned that the best way to control the population is through war, but he thinks it's very cruel and wonders if there's no other solution. Then Catherine tells him that Lucen is lying, as the Kingdom of Fides is rich in goods, and the Duchy of Bert controls the trade routes, so both countries are very wealthy. However, most of that wealth is in the hands of the nobility, and the common people are worse off than in Isaac. They die of hunger every winter in both countries, and the nobles prefer to let the food rot rather than sell it at a fair price. So, it's a war fought purely out of personal ambition, as uniting the peninsula would allow them to open the mountain paths and invade other countries to conquer the world. The protagonist thinks that they are all deceiving him, but Catherine clarifies that they are rather underestimating him because of his battle with Benedict, as everyone knows that the Silver Moon Knights don't kill. They might even use wounded or civilian hostages since they disdain his childishness and goodness. The protagonist understands that this might be true, as good people are foolish and deserve to be deceived. But neither of them is a good person, they fear each other, and that's why they came to talk to him. So, he unsheathes his sword and says they don't understand. If anyone insists on continuing the war, they will be his enemy. He then asks who among them wants to be the first to wield their sword against him. This intimidates and makes the two rulers hesitate, admitting that they fear him. They ask him how he proposes to arbitrate. Meanwhile, in the village, the dwarf leader wonders why there's no fight yet. Lucen states that their goal is to defeat each other and claim the land they believe belongs to them, which is irreconcilable. The protagonist suggests they fight each other in a tournament to determine the winner. Each side will send 10 knights to compete, risking their honor. This way, deaths and injuries will be controlled. Then, Lucen asks what happens if the other side doesn't keep their word, and the protagonist says that in that case, he will use his sword to bring justice to the victor and promises to do it for his title as a paladin. And that's how the 6th part of this manhwa ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to get here, so comment the word paladin in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.